welcome to all from the Office of International Partnerships at Shiv Nadar University. We are glad to host you virtually for today's panel discussion, which is the second day of two-day series of a panel discussion on changing landscape of higher education in India and abroad. Thank you, Professor Chatterjee, for ideating and conceptualizing the series. Professor Chatterjee is Dean, Office of International Partnerships and Head of the Economics Department at Shiv Nadar University. He shall be moderating the session tonight, and you'll hear him more soon. But before we begin, here's a couple of housekeeping announcements for our audience here. I would request them to leave their questions and comments in the chat box below. You can see it at a underpane on your screen, basically, and we'll be taking those questions towards the end of the discussion. If your question is for any particular panelist, I would advise you that you mention the name. And with this, let's get started. Over to you, Professor Chatterjee.
Thank you so much, Harshita, and welcome everyone to the second day, which is also the final day of a series of discussions on the changing landscape of higher education. And again, today we have three stellar people in the panel. All six of them are, well-known educationists, and as I said, they really live, drink, breathe, sleep, walk, education, right? And but it's not only that, they also are leading or have led universities, up right in the front. So they have that bit of that too, right? So it's a very rare combination when you get great thinkers, but also great doers, right? And all six of them, three today and three yesterday, fit that bill. So I'm very, very happy that we could get all six of them. Today, we have Dr. Daniel Diermeier, an internationally renowned political scientist, economist, and management scholar. I got emails, by the way, Daniel, oh, he has a paper in JET. I've read that. I'm an economist. So my friends emailed me about that, yeah. And he's currently the Chancellor of Vanderbilt University. And if you have been listening to the chat we were having before, he transitioned from being the provost of Chicago to Vanderbilt very recently and during the COVID. So I hope he is settling down well. Not going to get much of a time and chance for doing that, but nevertheless, yeah. So his research focused on formal political theory, political institution, interaction of business and politics, and behavioral models of politics. And of course, crisis and reputation management. He has written several books and many papers. We're very excited to have Dr. Diermeier to be here today with us, and I thank you for taking the time off and being with us today.
Thank you.
Also with us is Dr. Nicholas Dirks. I don't think he needs much of an introduction. He's a leading educationist and public intellectual, and all things education related to him. He was also the Chancellor of University of California, Berkeley. Before that, he was the Dean and Dean for Faculty and Vice President for Arts and Sciences at Columbia University. Now, he's also the President and CEO at the New York Academy of Sciences. He, as an academic leader, I can go on a long list of things that he has done and advocated, but some of the things that he really has put forward in different writings and actions too is accessibility, high quality undergraduate education, and globalization of universities. He's a lifelong supporter of interdisciplinary studies and across humanities, social sciences, natural and physical sciences. So, I will stop right there. But I'm really, really thankful that Nick could take the time off again early in the morning and be with us today. Thanks, Nick.
Thank you. Great to be here with you.
And of course, again, as we were speaking, your visit to SNU campus is due, and whenever it's possible, we'll make that happen. Yeah?
Wonderful. Look forward to it.
And also we have Dr. Yves Flückiger, I don't know if I pronounced that name correctly.
Yeah, it's a German name, so it's not easy to pronounce, but you did it very well.
Thank you. So Dr. Flukiger is currently the rector of University of Geneva. He's an education economist. Not that I chose given their background in economics, but yes, it turns out he's also an economist. He's passionate about innovation, digital transformation, and sustainability in higher education. He joined the faculty of the University of Geneva in 1992, directing the University Employment Observatory and the leading House Center of Excellence, leading the House of Center of Excellence in Education Economics. He's directed numerous projects and supported by the Swiss National Foundation, and has worked on a variety of things like migration, wage discrimination, sexual segregation, new forms of employment, child poverty, and again, the list is long, so I'll stop there. Again, thank you so much, and appreciate you being there. Yves, I was just remembering, at the top of the year we met at Davos, how different that world was, right? So
Exactly. Yeah.
Changed between then and now so drastically.
Yeah, you're still looking for another Davos now. It will be in Singapore or maybe in Switzerland again, but in June.
Right. So, today is the second day of our discussions that we are continuing with yesterday's things. Actually, yesterday we talked a lot about India to a large extent, but also, between the tension between short-term versus long-term and so on, and also how research can be funded and the finances of it. Right. So those are some of the things that we talked about yesterday. Today, today we basically are in a period of heightened uncertainties, deepened anxieties and restricted mobility. In some sense, what has that done to us is it has forced us to introspect and take a deeper look at not only the incremental change possible, because all of us are always doing that, but at the whole, the rationale of universities. Founders of the American Philosophical Society, which was set up in 1743, stated that universities are concerned to create and transmit, and within quote, I put, useful knowledge. So I guess that is the question that we need to really, really think hard about, is what is useful knowledge? Over time, understanding of that changes, and probably that's expected, right? Time changes a lot of things. But even at any point of time, there exists a whole diversity of views on that, right? And as an extension, the purpose of universities, which are supposed to create and disseminate that useful knowledge, remains contested. But maybe that is the nature of the universities. Maybe it's pointless to look for a universal definition. In fact, Clark Kerr, who was the first chancellor of Berkeley, wrote about half a century back, the university is so many things to so many different people that it must, of necessity, be personally at war with itself. There are several dichotomies that seem unresolvable, right? Universities are supposed to shape the future, but they're also products of the societies and they're part of it. How do we reconcile this dichotomy that universities reflect the reality of today and yet assert the change for tomorrow? How do we reconcile that long term with the immediate goals, local versus global, and so on? And there are so many of these, right? So let's start now thinking about these things, and let me ask each of the panelists to take a few minutes, maybe 5 to 7 minutes, to talk about what they think are some aspects of universities that are universal and unchangeable, that we can carry through, and some dimensions that you think we need to really debate and maybe even resolve. On top of my screen, I have Nick. So let me start with Nick. Nick, if you could take over from here.
Okay, well, thank you, Partha. What aspects of universities are universal and shared? That's what you would like us to address in our opening comment?
Maybe. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. First thing to say about universities is that they grew up, however distinctive any particular university, any particular national tradition, and so on, they grew up through a set of global exchanges. that means to some extent it's been a global context that we find having produced what we now take to be the university virtually everywhere around the world. I'm reminded because I see Eve in Geneva, which is of course close to Germany, that the research university in the United States developed in the late 19th century in large part because of the extraordinary influence of the German university on the American university. The American universities that began in the 17th and 18th centuries or the early 19th century began in large part to try to produce what existed in the UK, in England and Britain. But they were undergraduate colleges, very small. Initially, they trained students for the ministry more than for anything else. They then began by the late 18th century to train students in the law, but also to do so to very few numbers of students and without any particular commitment to high-powered research. That only began in the late 19th century. And again, it began because many Americans had gone to Germany to do their doctoral education. So great research universities were both established as private universities, as we have here, former provost of the University of Chicago. It was endowed in the late 19th century by John D. Rockefeller to create a great university, and it was one of the signal research universities in the US. Johns Hopkins was the first. They stole the president of the University of California to build it in 1875. And it became a kind of model for what we do. And even though Daniel Coit Gilman left the University of California in 1875 to go to Baltimore, the University of California followed by becoming a great research university in the 20th century. And in the US, of course, we have this patchwork of public and private universities. And they are equally represented in terms of the kinds of major research institutions that we're very proud that we were able to create here, but which again came out of a lot of interaction around the world. More recently in my life, I've been blessed to have many relationships in India, as you know. All my scholarship has been on India, so as a result of that, I visit for reasons that have nothing to do with my academic administration. As administrative interests, but I've been struck by how vital the process right now of creating new kinds of private universities in India is. And when I first came to India many years ago, there were no private universities, and most of the private universities in India today, of course, have been created only in the last 20 years. All of those universities, to some extent, have some kind of connection to Europe and the US. Many of its faculty have spent time in either university, often getting their doctoral training. And we still live in this international world in which we often model what we do on the example of some of the great universities around the world. And of course, even if we don't think about it that way explicitly, we're also living in a world in which there are global league tables that affiliate us all in terms of ranking systems that every university administrator, although we denounce the rankings in principle, look at very carefully in private and actually say nice things about when our universities are positioned at a very top level in those rankings. The commitments to knowledge, to the dissemination of knowledge through education, especially undergraduate education, but also professional and graduate education. The interest in training students for careers, but also giving them knowledge that is useful in a broader sense, that is to say, some sense of history, some sense of civic responsibility, some sense of being what it is to be a moral person and to encounter other struggles about how to live the good life. These are all things I think that around the world we profess. Some universities, of course, do have this great other capacity, which is to not only teach the results of research, but also to produce new knowledge through great research. And that's a very expensive proposition. It requires major forms of support, usually from the government, when You think about it, either even private universities and have to go to the government for supporting research. And at its best, the university system reflects that common interest in education, in building community, in serving the public, and in creating new knowledge. But as Clark Kerr, my predecessor as Chancellor of the University of California, said, as you noted, 50 years ago, there's this kind of constant war among and between the various parts of the university. By the way, he went on to say the only thing that united the faculty at the University of California was a common grievance over parking. And I think an earlier iteration of that was to the effect that at the University of Chicago, the one thing that linked the entire university was a common heating system. We know that there is nevertheless a great commitment to all of these different kinds of pillars of the university, even when at a place like Berkeley, you have not only great research, you have 30,000 undergraduates, you have 10,000 professional and graduate students, you have a football team, you have all kinds of other things that you have to do in order to become the expression of what we call a comprehensive university. Anyway, I'll stop there, but we'll talk perhaps more about some of the differences later on.
Thanks, Nick. You laid it out very nicely, and we'll come back to some of the issues that you have raised here. Yves, will you want to go next, please? I think you're muted. Can't hear.
Yeah, I think many things have been already said by Nick, so I will try maybe to focus on some elements that have been already said. I think the universities around the world have some common characteristics. The first one, and whatever the time where they were created, I think they are all very resilient. And in these times where we see so many things disappearing, I think this gives to the society a way of being resilient and having an education for everybody that need to create some added value for the society. And I think this resilience is something that need to be reinforced nowadays in order to face also the difficult time that all societies are passing by now. So resilience is something that seems to me very, very, very important. And again, whatever the time when this university were created, it must be said also on that respect that I think that public universities can go through a hard time that we are now facing in a better way, maybe because they are not depending so much on students' fees. And we know that right now, for private universities, the students, they do not want maybe to pay the same kind of fees for just staying at home and following online teaching. So there may be some differences, but I think the first characteristic is this resiliency, and it seems to me a very important characteristic to face the time that we are now put in. The second aspect that seems to me also very important is the openness. Universities have always been created on the mobility of students, mobility of professors, going from one way to another, from one country to another. And I think that this kind of exchanges has brings so much in order to develop the knowledge. And recently, to face also the COVID-19, I think that this internationality of universities, the fact that we have more and more open science, is something that has been very helpful for creating new research in order to also be able to develop some vaccine now that have been put into the society in a very short term and short period of time. And I think that was not possible without this kind of internationality of universities, of the openness. And I think that is a characteristic also that is has been always the case for universities. And again, as we see that the countries have some kind of tendency to close their borders just to try to maybe get out of their situation by thinking that the solution is only at the national level, I think that university again have a very important role to play on that particular time. The fact that also we have multilateral relations, not only from one country to another, looking at the situation in Europe, I think Switzerland is a very small country. And if there were not this kind of multilateral relation, we were never able to be able to create very high ranked university according to the Shanghai ranking or other kind of ranking, because we are really very much related to the capacity of attracting students, or attracting professors, attracting people who are being able to do that research. And the fact also that for us, it's very important that we are still very closely related to European Union. And you know that now this situation of Switzerland is a little bit difficult, because we may be part of Europe programs or not. And that again is something that seems to be very important right now in terms of where we need to have that kind of relation between university. And finally, I think the relation between society and the university is important. It will always be the case that university try to answer in a comprehensive way to the challenges that the society has to face. And again, if you look at the recent time with the COVID-19, I think that we have seen so many researchers who were able to reorient their research in order to bring their own experiences, their own expertise in order to face that problem. And it's not only the case that they were able to give some solution right now for the time being, but also the fact that they were working together. And I think it's not only a question of life sciences that need to bring their own expertise in order to face the COVID-19, but also we need to have a multidisciplinary approach of that situation. We need also people who are able to work on affective sciences in order to understand why people are not having the trust that they should have regarding the scientific expertise. And then we need really to think about how we can develop some kind of public policy which are as efficient as possible. So I think this is the kind of characteristics that seems to me overall the kind of character that we can find in all universities around the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Would you like to go?
Okay, so first of all, thank you very much for inviting me again. And I should say that the one thing that makes me unhappy about this panel that we're not doing it in person. I spent many wonderful days in India and was looking forward to that again. So that's for another day.
Let's
so
hope
sorry?
I'm saying let's hope soon enough.
Oh, absolutely. So I think I can connect with some of the things that Nick and Yves were talking about, and I'm gonna connect with two aspects actually that Nick started off with. One was, and part that you mentioned it as well. You know, it's kind of the much quoted Clark Kerr book, and you know, in his introduction, he points out that, and I may get the exact numbers wrong, but I think they're close enough, that among the 10 most enduring institutions in the world, 7 of them are universities. And I think the only other that I can remember right now is probably the Catholic Church. That's not a university. And of course, you know, they're resilient. They are persistent. And as Nick has pointed out, there is a set of enduring values that is really global in nature. I mean, there's a community of scholars, a community of professors. Yves was talking about that as well. That is a strong bond and a strong commitment, I think, to a vision that is shared. Now, exactly how to define that, that's of course the difficult part. So let me start out with the second thing that Nick was talking about, which is really the kind of evolution of the American university model. And it's well known that it's really a blend of the British kind of college system and the German research university, really created, you know, by Humboldt in the early 19th century in the University of Berlin, now the Humboldt University, which had a much more of a research focus, and also introduced the whole idea of kind of modern graduate and doctoral education. So what that points out already I think another important component is that there is diversity of different models. I mean, we have in the United States, it's very diverse. We have everything from community colleges, private research university, public universities, liberal arts colleges, and of course that's a landscape that we see evolve now around the world. In India, in Israel, a whole variety of other countries are creating these kind of different models. So what is it that is in common there and that is shared? So I'm going to give you different lenses on that. I'm going to focus for a moment on the private research university because that's the one, first of all, I know the best, and I think it's also a particular unique model that exhibits a couple of characteristics that really, I think, illuminate what universities are or should be. Humboldt, when he talked about the creation of the German university, used this as a very important concept, but there's no English translation for it, like many German words. Bildung, it's called Bildung. Okay, Bildung does not mean education. There's a separate word for that. Bildung means something else. It has the same root as building. So what you're basically doing is when you go to university is you self-actualize. You interact with teachers, you learn, but you also create yourself into something that wasn't there before. This is a super important concept, certainly for the German model. And so what that means is that I think we should think about universities not universities, particular research universities. We should not think about them especially in terms of education or even research. I think there is a sense of realizing human potential that's at the core of it. And that, of course, is largely focused on, knowledge production, argumentation, being part of a seminar room, all that things. But remember, universities do other things as well. Many universities have fine art schools where we are basically developing new young artists. That's not about knowledge production. It's about being a great trombonist or great clarinetist. Of course, in the United States, there's a big athletics programs. UC Berkeley has a big one. We have a big one. It's a little bit less prominent in the United Kingdom, but it's part of that as well. And then, of course, universities do a whole variety of other things. They run academic medical centers, some of them vast, some of them humongously important. And I would say the academic medical centers, for example, were the backbone of the COVID-19 response in the United States. Really, really crucially important in many aspects of it. We run schools. University of Chicago ran 4 charter schools and a private school. So there's all these other activities that are all, I think, best, from my point of view, best understood about realizing human potential. And then we have a point of view of how do we do that, and that's what the university is about. And there are different point of views, and that gives you the different kind of variety of identities that universities have. Now, the important point here, however, is I think to understand how universities live in the ecosystem, the broader ecosystem of the country where they operate. Now, the land-grant universities, so what we now call the big, great, public universities in the United States, the Berkeleys, the Michigans, the Wisconsins that were created around the same time, a little earlier than the private research universities, play a hugely important role, on the research side, as does the private research university. That's less true, for the liberal arts colleges that have a different purpose, or for community colleges. But the super important piece, and I think that's something that sometimes is overlooked in other countries, is the ecosystem where they operate. So here's what I mean by that. The fundamental contribute, in my view, I would love to hear, Ethan and Nick's point of view, but the fundamental breakthrough to me in the rise of American universities happened right after the Second World War with the Vannevar Bush plan, the Unlimited Frontier, which basically led to the creation of independent agencies, NSF, NIH, a couple of others, where there's massive influx of federal money, but it was allocated in a competitive way. So that's very different from how this works in many other countries, certainly at that scale. It has been massively successful and supported and created the modern research university, which meant that a private university, for example, would be competing with a public university for funds entirely on merit. Now, of course, there are always little issues here and there, but it created, I think, a model of research funding unparalleled anywhere. Now, the important piece here is that those funds were dedicated to certain areas, not everywhere. The federal government has zero interest in United States federal government has no interest in creating a PhD student in the humanities. There's no funding for that. The alternative, some small alternative funding sources for that, some philanthropy, but even that is small. So when we create a new PhD student in English or anthropology or German literature, we're doing this because we believe that as a university, that is an important contribution to scholarship. It is not supported. It is not supported or only trivially supported by federal research money or philanthropy even. But that's not true in certain fields. It's certainly not true in engineering. It's certainly not true in certain fields of the physical sciences. It's certainly not true in the biomedical sciences. So one way to think about this, as the way the whole system works, is that the federal government says, I want you, university, to create me an army of PhDs in biomedical research, and we're funding that. And that's, of course, the way it does. It works on the educational side for PhD education, and the same on the research side. So that has been an enormously productive collaboration. And just to highlight that is the tremendous contribution that universities have made during COVID-19, and in general on that. So at Vanderbilt, we were involved from the early research on remdesivir, the development of monoclonal antibodies, now in clinical trials with AstraZeneca, the early work on the Moderna virus. We were leading clinical studies. I mean, this is like an enormously important contribution in this age. At Berkeley, the fundamental research on CRISPR, most important technology in biomedical research, that is an enormous contribution to society. But it's important that this operates in certain areas: biomedical, technical research, engineering, certain area, not across the board. And that's a very different approach than having an entire education system that's a public education system. Very different approach, and it allows the flourishing of private research universities. And I think it's at the heart, at the core, for why it is that still today US universities have been so prevalent. So two components. One, I think the model of blending the British college system with the German research university is a wonderful model. It's very expensive, but it's a great model. And then to have the universities compete in an ecosystem with others where research funds are given on merit, based on competition with other universities, is an enormously important component, I think, of what's driving the success of American universities.
Great. Thanks for that.
By the way, my name is not Rachel, so I don't quite. This is my assistant's name, so I just want to state that for the record. Okay, good.
If Harshita is there, if you can change his name, you can do that, please. Yeah, I don't know if that's possible to do. So no, that's wonderful. I mean, all three of you have laid this out very clearly, and there's so many issues to talk about. Let's pick up on one thing first, which is what came up in practically all of yours thing. This aspect of university that it encompasses many things together. You talked about, for example, while there's no funding for, let's say, humanities, certain areas of humanities, the university still wants it, right? And it's not because it's not directed purely from a financial perspective of it, but what maybe Nick referred to earlier, somewhat a moral aspect of the university. So now if you think about a country like India, while of course we are talking about global education, but if you think about a country like India or other emerging markets where education is extremely important because that's a ticket out of poverty, and therefore there is that sense that, okay, what are the skills do I need that will take me from here to a better life? But at the same time, for a university, there's this whole dichotomy of views in that sense that, okay, should we just focus on skills? And in case of India, we have done that quite a bit. Now, there's a sense of that we need to broaden our education, to bring in this multidisciplinarity of it. So what would you think is, how should we think about multidisciplinarity in this kind of a situation, right? Where we need to balance in some sense this very, very fundamental aspect of life that, okay, education really elevates you out of, a life that was poor and devoid of certain things, right? But at the same time, you understand this kind of an education, multidisciplinary education that we're talking about is much, much more expensive also. So we need to think of a balance. So what are your views? And maybe, one of you can start, and it's an open question to all three of you.
So let me just begin by saying that, again, to revert a little to the historical background in terms of the emergence of at least the American Research University, a place like Berkeley, but for that matter, all the land-grant universities and all the public universities that were established around the sense that a new state needed to have a university in order to grow and prosper economically, socially, politically. But primarily, the task of the land-grant university was to train students in practical skills, to join a vocational element, effectively, to the more liberal arts kind of orientation that colleges in the Northeast and to some extent the Midwest and South had begun with on the British model. And there was, even in places like Berkeley, a kind of war at some level between those who wanted the university only to focus on agriculture and mining. Most engineering schools began as schools of mining, as it did here. Those who wanted the more practical and those who wanted to maintain the liberal. And in fact, Berkeley was formed out of a land grant that came for support of that kind of more vocational education, but it was established by people from Yale who had this more liberal arts kind of orientation at the same time. And what managed to happen, and as Daniel has so well put, the kind of capacity of universities to put these different elements together, make them part of a coherent whole, has been, I think, one of the great reasons for the extraordinary success of the American university, particularly when joined, as you said, Daniel, with the great commitment of the US government to supporting federal research through principal investigator-funded research. And it's competitive, it's based on merit. It also goes to individuals, not to universities, with the idea that there's some overhead that will go to support the infrastructure of that research. But it's not a grant to a university for big science. It's a grant to a PI, to a particular scientist and his or her team. But the vocational element there continues to express itself in different ways and forms across the subsequent 140 years up to the present moment. And of course, there are huge critiques right now of the university, critiques that in some respects go to the heart of that kind of commitment to a liberal education, which includes the humanities, but it actually is also a commitment to an interdisciplinary kind of education, right? And that critique is saying, look, the cost of college is so high. In 2011, when the level of indebtedness in the US went over $1 trillion, there was just a cry of concern about the fact that universities could charge this kind of money, could put people in debt for the rest of their lives, and then teach them useless knowledge. And of course, I don't think anyone in our panel thinks that, to study some of the core philosophical or ethical or historical issues that give rise to our present day is useless. But there was a concern that this was, in fact, a mistake and not something that was critical. And again, there are a lot of people who think that the task of higher education should simply be preparing students for jobs. The word skilling is used in a lot of different contexts. And in places like India, of course, that conversation is even more intense because of some of the reasons that you just adduced. This is a complex issue. And again, as Daniel said, vis-a-vis the United States, there's an entire ecosystem. There are colleges and universities that are more vocationally oriented. But there was still a commitment on the part of many, not just university leaders, but political leaders, even at the level of high school education. There was a committee of 10 made up of university presidents in the late 19th century that said, we don't want to track students. And we want to make sure that they have, kind of comprehensive education, preparing them to go to a comprehensive college if at all possible. These are things that were efforts to, again, not just join different historical components that led to the modern university, but to also embrace the full range of things that the university sets out to do, which, as Daniel said, is to allow students in a way to realize themselves. And yet today, with the costs being what they are, we're confronting, I think, another moment, not unlike some previous moments in our history, and I'm sure moments in European history, and certainly moments in the history of Indian education, where we're being asked to make some choices and to come down and say, look, we're going to focus on at least vocational skilling for careers for the greatest proportion of students who actually need that, and we can do that at a lower cost if we really set our minds to a particular outcome. Now, the other thing that will happen right now because of the pandemic is that this focus will concentrate even more. And it will concentrate even more, I think, not on the top tier of universities in the US, but in the second, third, and other tiers that we have. Again, for financial reasons. Public universities, as I'm sure everybody knows, are great universities, but they have been losing the kind of funding they used to get from the state. They get money from the central government for individual research, but public universities get supported by the state, not in the sense of government, but the state of California, the state of Vermont, or the state of Wisconsin. The amount of money that public universities get today is so much less than it used to, a small proportion of its budget, 9 to 12% if you take Michigan and California and UC and so on. In that context, the pandemic has been a very sharp hit. It's been a hit to private universities, but it's been a really big hit to publics. Even this morning, just as I woke up and was scanning the Chronicle of Higher Education, there were two stories, one about the University of Vermont, which is cutting 1/5 of its programs because of the budget hit, the other because of the University of Colorado at Boulder, which is trying to encourage faculty to retire and then replace faculty with instructors. Both are hit with big budget concerns. The University of California, Berkeley has lost $300 million over the course of the 12 months that you sort of projected from last March to next March. So all of these concerns about what the university can do as a whole are going to, I think, be subjected to tremendous scrutiny, both within and outside those universities. As we do that, I think it's critical, again, to understand that the commitment that all universities, whether public or private, have is to the public good. And that in as much as we're trying to create opportunities for individuals to self-realize, we're also trying to create opportunities for them to contribute to their societies. And as we do that, we invest a great deal of resources into an extraordinary array of opportunities for our students at the same time that we're focusing on research. And again, I want to echo both of my colleagues here who have said that without the university system of research, not just in the United States, but globally, we wouldn't have seen the spectacular success of vaccine development that we have over the course of just the last year. Unprecedented scientific pace of knowledge production around vaccines. And it's been, just to your first question, it's also been a global process. Pfizer is run by CEOs from a Greek immigrant. It was done in concert with two German scientists who are from Turkey. And every other scientific discovery is a product of that kind of extraordinary international collaboration with university training and often university laboratories at the center of that process. We can't afford to lose that as a nation. We can't afford to lose that as a world. And I very much hope that that kind of commitment to research can be mobilized in India in a way that will also take advantage of and make that kind of resource available too, in a much greater sense than already is the case, to the Indian nation as well.
And absolutely, I think, pointed out some of the things that India need in India has to do, not only need, but it has to do. And I think some of these things are, afoot in this new education policy that this government has come up with. I don't know how much and how soon they will be implemented, including what Daniel pointed out is, competitive way to allocate funds. And, that we know that efficiency increases by that. India didn't have that. So now it's going to institute that. And hopefully private universities like us can also bid for that, right? Earlier, our research scholars and researchers wouldn't be able to get some funds, but now hopefully we'll do that. But let's get back to this global aspect. And, I think this is something that all of us realize right now, that, research is global, the way university knowledge is global, right? And by the way, the virus is global, right? I mean, the virus, if at all, has pointed out anything, is the futility of borders, right? So, but at the same time, in some sense, because of the pandemic, but also before the whole politics of it that was happening, there seemed to be a hardening of boundaries. There seemed to be, somewhat mobility discouraged to a certain extent. And Yves talked about that a little bit. So Yves, what do you think, what will be the future? Do you think we'll get back to a global world or no?
But I think, first of all, we have a responsibility regarding our students. And in this regard, I think we need really to answer the need of the society in terms of the kind of competency that the society needs to develop itself. But at the same time, we have also a responsibility to give new direction to the education, not only answer the needs, but also give a new direction of our education, the way we educate our students. And I'm just referring to something that happened in my faculty of economics and management a few years ago, maybe 2 years ago. The students were very much willing to change the way we were educating them in terms of economics in particular. Some time ago, everything was related to the maximization of profits. And the students say, no more. I think there are other values that we need really to think about. And they ask very much that we change in a way our curriculum in order to create new value in the thing that we were giving to them. And we have created a new kind of program called Business and Human Rights, and business and SDGs. So it's in a way, really, we need also to be innovative in what could be useful for society, not only answering in the short term to what society needs or seems to need, but also to try to create new value for our. I think also that if we look at the climate change, if you look at the COVID-19, I think it's more and more clear that we need really to attack this kind of problem with a multidisciplinary view. And that what has been also made in Geneva, but I'm sure it's the case also in many other universities, and it's a way to say that it's very important to keep the comprehensive university, because these are the only place where you can make sure that the people from different disciplines, they are together, they try to answer a given challenge together. And I think that something that needs to be kept very well, to have very excellent faculties, the traditional one, but at the same time to make sure that we are developing on that basis, excellent basis on research and teaching, also center for interdisciplinarity, and center related to climate change, center related to resolution of the challenges that the society needs to face. And it's something that can be different from one period of time to another, but always bring different disciplines together to face these challenges. And finally, I think we really need to get away of the short-term way to look at our development. That's also something that the society may look at. And it's also a way to say that some disciplines are less important than others. In fact, if you see at the breakthrough innovation in all society, it's always something that has been brought by fundamental research. fundamental research is a research very risky in a way. You don't know what's going out of that research, but we need really to, in a very competitive way, as Daniel was saying, competition is quite important. It's the reason why Switzerland fight to be part of European Union, because if you are just standing a part of European Union, we'll organize our competition among a few universities only, but being part of Europe, then you have to face the competition of many other very excellent universities in Europe, and this can bring very fundamental research to a top situation where, in fact, some innovation we get out of it. And the last Nobel Prize that we had, they were developing their research 20 years ago, but 20 years ago, nobody was thinking that they will find anything when they started their research, and it was done because we have a competitive funding situation. We have the National Foundation for Scientific Research, which was always supporting that kind of research, very risky research, very fundamental research, long-term research, and now they have been able to create some innovation that were not think maybe at the beginning of the research. That seems to be very important to develop.
Thank you. Let me take this to some other direction, though it's kind of related to what you pointed out, that what universities should do rather than just reacting to what's happening today, right? And in that context, let's think a little bit about the role of universities in shaping the political landscape, so to speak, including, we have had debates about democracy, about free speech, and somewhat related to that is the idea of inclusion, right? I mean, whether it's in the US when this Black Lives Matter came up, or here in India when we constantly think about how to include more, the Dalits and people who have been left behind. What ways and, what are the different methods or mechanics you can think of in terms of how the university can engage? Because one aspect of that is also that it's risky because it takes away from some of the maybe, core ideas of university of just basic teaching and basic research, right? So for a university, and again, if funds are also related in somewhat to what the universities do, then that can be a risky activity. So
yeah.
How, and first of all, is there a space for universities to engage in that, or should we just separate that out and focus primarily on doing our own things and not bothering about the bigger questions the society is facing today? Or how do we go about engaging with that?
So my sense is that there's really two different aspects here. One of them are issues that are related to the core values of the university. And those have to do, diversity, inclusion, free speech, and so forth. And the reason why they are core to the university are because they are core component of our point of view of how we best generate transformative education and field-defining research. And what are the pieces to that? One, you want to provide access to everyone to the university, irrespective of their background, whether it's economic or where they come from, or gender or race or whatever. It's like a sports team. You want to have people that come. You want to have talent from across the world, no matter what they look like or what their point of view is. That's why financial aid is hugely important. That's why we need to make sure that we are open and that we bring as many students that can benefit from a university, UC Berkeley education or University of Chicago or Vanderbilt education there. One. Second piece is when they're there, we need to create an environment where they thrive. That's much more complicated because we know that if you're the only kid that comes from a particular background, looks a particular way, it's more difficult. You may need support groups. You may not have the same high school education as some of your peers, but with a little help, you can get there. That's more complicated. That's not just about financial support. That's really about creating a sense of belonging. But these are absolutely core to what a university are. And so are the free exchange of ideas. So to maintain a sense of open discourse, a place where the better argument wins, irrespective of what you look like or what you come from. So I think those are just essential. Now, of course, they're debated themselves, like everything else in a university, exactly what that means. But fundamentally, universities and university leaders must be forceful in defending those values. For example, that means in the current climate, it's my own story, because I'm both a first generation student and I came from a different country. I've been very vocal on providing continued access for international students and for financial support. That is essential. Now, there are other aspects where I think it's much more problematic. And the reason for that is, again, connected to the purpose of the university. You want to be a place where people can debate different ideas. And it's dangerous, and I think counterproductive, if the university takes a position that looks like the party line. And so that you feel like you can't go against it because now you're going against what the university goes for. So at Chicago, where I spent much of my life, this was codified in a couple of principles, so-called Chicago Principle and the Calvin Report, which basically said the university will have a stance of principled neutrality with respect to issues, social issues, other than those that affect the functioning of the university. But there we're super engaged. So that was the difference. So that means, for example, the university will not have a position on minimum wage, or whether the police should be defunded or not. That is for the students to discuss, and that's for the faculty to discuss, so that there is a platform where faculty can take even radical positions, and we will support them, but that is not our point of view. So as a consequence of that, we have been very reluctant, both at the University of Chicago and at Vanderbilt, to put restrictions on how our endowment is used. Because our sense was, if we say we can't invest our money in this particular case, we are taking a position on issues that are not core to the functioning of the university, and where our faculty and our students and our alums have very different points of views. So that's the way I'm thinking about it. I think it's super important to distinguish those things. Some of them are core and essential to what a university does, its values and how it functions. Others are broader social issues where reasonable people can have different points of view and where there are real policy debates. And those are issues where I think it's best for the university not to take a position, and in order to create maximum freedom for its faculty and students to debate these issues and then come up with their own positions on their own.
I couldn't agree more with you, Daniel, but also, in some sense, there's a cost to creating that platform where people can come in and talk about anything and take, as you pointed out, take even radical positions, right? And of course, Nick had to deal with that firsthand. So Nick, from your experience—
Nick knows all about that, yes.
Anything that you would want to add here?
My hair is so white.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, Daniel, that, at the University of California, we took the same general position that other universities took of institutional neutrality around political issues on the one hand. But on the other hand, Berkeley and Chicago are kind of at the antipodes of a spectrum which is united by a common commitment to free inquiry, to open exchange, but which differ around the level of political engagement traditionally expected, not only of students and faculty, but even of the administration. And so, beginning with the free speech movement of the 1960s, going right up and, to the expenditure of millions of dollars to make it possible for arguably, not terribly intellectually productive conversations to take place around the visits of Milo Yiannopoulos and Coulter and the like. You get yourself sort of positioned right at the crux of the contradictions between the different kinds of values we espouse. So on the one hand, we do make value statements about our commitment, as you did, Daniel, to equity, diversity, inclusion, right? We try to create a welcoming environment for all of our students, and we are very concerned about the differential kind of access, as it were, to knowledge on the basis of prior experience, which has to do not only with school, but also with all the other components, social, racial, ethnic, and the like, that affect one's capacity to succeed and to prosper. We know this from studies that, for example, were done by my provost here at Berkeley for many years, Claude Steele, whose book, Whistling Vivaldi is a kind of classic expression of how you can make real differences by the environment you create for students to study. And so we make certain kinds of commitments. And then on the other hand, students and faculty would come to me and say, how can you possibly make these kinds of statements about inclusion and equity and diversity and allow somebody who's going to come in and defame individuals on the basis of their identity, people like Milo Yiannopoulos, how can you allow them onto the campus? And so, we have to, I think, recognize and accept that the university, because of the kinds of values it expresses, is always going to have to negotiate these kinds of contradictory forces and articulate them as part of our mission, which is to say, yes, these things don't seem to sit well together, but we are committed to them all, and therefore we have to create an environment in which it is possible for us to see that the world, even on campus, even within the gates of any university, public or private, will maintain some of the contradictions of the world outside, whether we like it or not.
One very quick question in relation to what we've been talking about. What happens when we talked about core values and some things that the university needs to defend, but particularly in the context of American universities, talking about what happens when they go outside US, right? I mean, they set up campuses, whether it's Yale, NUS, or NYU, Abu Dhabi. Do you think that the same core values translate there? Do you think, it's very different in that sense?
It's a great question. And actually, Eve and I both, in our roles at our respective universities, have created joint programs with, for example, Tsinghua University of, the greatest research university arguably in China. And in the case of Berkeley, we actually invested in a program that ended up being a joint research center in Shenzhen in southern China. And it's been a very successful collaboration. But of course, you're always asked these questions as to, how do you, ensure that the same kind of freedom of exchange, the same kind of protection and rights and the like that are afforded on American campuses, how they can be, or on your campus in Geneva, how can you work in a different environment? I'll let Eve speak to this, perhaps, because you're still managing this in the present world. But it's something that I think, in my view, you have to take on board. But I think that if you respond by saying, we're not going to deal with other places in the world because we are so pure, we are both, not accepting the extent to which our own purity is already, a complex issue, as I just said. And secondly, we're going to end up just retreating from a global set of relationships and engagements that I think are critical and valuable in all kinds of ways, including the ways in which they actually provoke these kinds of discussions about what intellectual inquiry really means. Eve?
Yes, it's a very, very, very important question. I mean, I think we all are founded in some very important values that can be negotiated, and we need really to have always the same kind of value whatever we are doing. Is it research? Is it education? Is it the fact that we are having some partnership with other universities? But at the same time, I think we do not want to impose our value to other society. I mean, just respect also the fact that we need maybe to understand the particular context of the country where we have some kind of agreement or exchanges or relationship. But I think we really need to work together, because I think the fact that we have a very fruitful collaboration with Tsinghua University in terms of the SDG program, and the Chinese students, they are coming to Geneva. And I think by coming to Geneva for 1 year or 6 months, I think they can also learn a little bit how the Swiss society is functioning, and not only getting the value of the University of Geneva, but then also our students, they are going to China. They are staying there for 6 months or even one year. They're getting a joint degree, Tsinghua University of Geneva. But I think they are coming back then with some other view on the Chinese society, and they have learned also other culture. They have learned something that will enrich them very much. So I think I believe very much that we need to really have this kind of exchanges of students, exchanges of professors. This is something which is also the basis of universities. We have also at the University of Geneva Confucius, but we really try to make sure that the activities there is really something which is in a way in terms of making comparison in different disciplines between the law or property law in China, property law in Switzerland or in Australia and in US. We made this kind of activity there of research where we're trying to make comparative research, and this is very fruitful. And it's not only trying to teach the language, Chinese language, but also to have this kind of research which is really related to the difference between societies. And this is also very interesting to have some research done on that basis. We are not all the same. There are different societies, different organizations, and we need also to have that bring into our research our teaching also.
Thank you so much. And it's been so engaging. I wish I can ask so many more questions to all of you, but let me take a few questions from our audience, because I think there's a whole lot of questions out there, and I'll try and read some of these questions. Okay, so Alice Clark says, Eve speaks of students' demand for changes in curriculum to respond to values they see being undermined. This is what many Indian students are doing now at great cost to themselves. Under current political circumstances in India, is it possible for a university to alter itself from within? I don't know how much you know the context of India. And
just a little bit. I've never been to India, but I hope that it will
has to be remedied. That has to be remedied.
But yes, I think it was only in a way we need also to anticipate the evolution of the society. And it's true that sometimes this anticipation can put maybe the students in a particular situation, but talking about the fact that our students, they ask probably to change the curriculum of economics teaching, I think this is something that's happening everywhere, and the society is changing. During the last weekend in Switzerland, we had a votation regarding the responsibility of Swiss firms when they are having activities outside of Switzerland, trying to say that they need to behave in a way that is ethical and also in a way respecting very much the human rights. And if they are not doing it, they can be put into the trial in Switzerland. And I think the majority of population say, yes, we need to change that way business is done in Switzerland and in other countries also. So I think we are just anticipating something that's happening in the society. But yes, it's not only answering the need of the society, but trying also to say we should go in that direction.
Thank you. There's a question from Hanakim from Adelphi University. Is there a role for a small and medium-sized liberal arts college to partner with better resourced institutions, widen the pool of knowledge production? Sorry about that, I'm messing that up. This includes India, US, and institutions elsewhere. And here, let me put a little bit of context. Yesterday, Pradeep Khosla, who's the Chancellor of University of California, San Diego, he mentioned that we are going to see a lot of consolidation, and many of the small universities will probably no longer exist in the future, right? And I think it's coming to a certain extent from that background also. She was there yesterday also, so I suppose that's playing out there. So I don't know if one of you would want
I can speak to that, and then whoever else can jump in. So I think that this is a super important question. So I think, one of the things we're seeing right now is like the stress put on higher education system in general, due to COVID, certainly in the United States, but across the world has been intense. I saw yesterday a number which I just found was just astonishing. I mean, we lost basically 8% of our workforce during COVID-19 in higher education, unprecedented since the Second World War. And it's like, I think it was 450,000 jobs that were lost, which is a sizable number. And so I think the strain that we have already seen has just been accelerated to that. So I think you're gonna see consolidation. You're gonna see, we know there's an increased number of struggling institutions that are closing up shop. But I think what's sometimes underestimated, which is really what the questioner is asking about, are partnerships. So universities are notoriously bad with these partnerships, and we just need to get better at that. And we did a little something during my time at Chicago, where we had a partnership between the University of Chicago and the University of Illinois and Argonne National Laboratory around quantum science, which was, a particular scientific aspect where it made sense. But I think, collaborations between public universities and private and liberal arts colleges and community colleges, they're just going to be essential. And my sense is that this comes back to something we talked about before, is that there's in part driven by various factors, but we've lost a little bit, I think, the courage to be unique and different. And that if you're liberal arts colleges, that's what you do. And if you're public university at a particular something, that's something you do. There's too much convergence, I think, on the kind of, on the, what I would say, the kind of top 30 universities in the United States. Everybody has to have a PhD program all across the board in all sorts of things. We always worry about the rankings. So I think they're, sharpening that and then thinking about partnering is probably a good idea.
Just add to that, first of all, there is a history in which there are partner universities have merged before, and it's been a very successful process. Pradeep, before he went to UCSD, was at Carnegie Mellon, which, as the name suggests, is two institutions that merged at a time when they were in financial difficulty. But Daniel's absolutely right that, even though there were stresses and strains on many colleges and some universities in the pre-pandemic period, the pandemic itself has been a real shock to the system. And we're going to see more in the way both of closures and of mergers. But I think the flip side of the pandemic, that is to say, what we're recognizing that we can take from this experience after the pandemic and use and build on, is the extent to which things like this allow us to collaborate. So increasingly, there will be opportunities to merge, to have students take courses in multiple colleges and universities so that not everyone has to have a program and everything. For faculty to teach in multiple universities in ways that will help maintain that kind of interdisciplinary capacity for students. To also engage in more interdisciplinary work in research areas. There are huge opportunities that we're seeing even in an event like the one that you're hosting here from Shivananda University. So, as we go forward, I think, there are going to be different models, even new models that will be created to allow for different kinds of hybrid institutional relationships both inside, but also across not just neighboring universities in the United States or in Europe, but universities in very different parts of the world.
So universities as platforms like an Amazon, you think is feasible?
Well, that wouldn't be the metaphor I would use, certainly not at Berkeley, but.
All right. There are so many other questions.
Because I'm no longer chancellor, but I can't. But I wouldn't say that anyway. Yeah.
There are quite a few other questions and some very nice questions, but we're running out of time. I'll find a way to get these questions to you. Maybe some are specific to you, and some to all. But we have had really 2 days of great discussion, and I'm not really exaggerating here. And people who have been here for both the days will attest to that. People who are here today was, they got a treat today, and I'm sure they are eager to hear more. But we have to call it, well, a night here. But before we do that, can I request our Vice Chancellor, Professor Rupa Manjari Ghosh, to say something and maybe wrap up this whole thing together?
Yeah, can you hear me, Partha, now? 1 minute, okay. It's been a real pleasure. Fortunately for me, yesterday I was in the panel, so today I could just listen to you and not get nervous about my turn to answer questions and things like that. So it's been really wonderful. Maybe what I'll do, because too many points have been discussed, but let me just try to recap some, and Partha, you interject whenever. And some of the points, not in any particular order, the way it's coming to my mind right now. So one thing, and in my own language actually, so one thing I've been hearing from yesterday, and I also talked about it a bit, that one thing that COVID-19 induced, this whatever everybody's calling a disruption, what it has done is to lay bare the inner workings of universities for all to see. So whatever we have not gotten right, the pedagogy and or the process pre-COVID, the digital mode exposed the weaknesses more. But I think all our panelists did not pay much attention to this pandemic, barring today the economic ones, of course. And I'm going to come to that, what we have heard in these 2 days. But everybody is of the opinion that nothing much will change in the long run, but will make the best of two worlds, the online and on-site. And maybe there will be two kinds of students, kinds of courses that you can deliver fully online, courses you can't, and so on and so forth. That will actually go on. And education is not about getting just a credential. So in these 2 days, thanks to Partha and the brilliant panelists, we got reminded of some basics. So it's not about getting a credential. So university's core is the realization of human potential. I really loved it. I mean, it sums it up. So when you ask the question, how do you realize human potential, the different criteria emerge. One thing that we all are talking about is what we call research universities. When we started Shiv Nada University, one of the key phrases that, thanks to I think Andy Hamilton at that time, that I've been borrowing and talking about, is that a good university is the one that produces more knowledge than it consumes. And today Partha mentioned the mandate of such universities then therefore is not just knowledge generation, but he used meaningful knowledge generation. So that of course can combine many of the debates we have been having last 2 days. What is meaningful? And it's very clear that a market-driven agenda will essentially be blinkered. And I think that's the part of the university that's kind of universal, though the universities are the ones that are actually driving the change that we are seeing. So the major part of our discussion actually we're hinging on financing, and we do not have the final word on financing higher education. There were arguments yesterday about education as a private good, which does not therefore need government support, and research as a public good, therefore to be supported by governments. I'm simplifying the major argument, but this is not very convincing because of the synergy between teaching and research. And it's understood to have research-based teaching in these research universities, right? So anyway, I think one thing that is clear, and in the Indian context, more so because we are following these great leaders, as I think Nick mentioned, all these major private universities in India are all in works of last 20 years. Shiv Nada University is only 9-year-old. We already got this tag of institution of eminence, which makes me very, very nervous. You have to be worthy of that tag following in your footprints, and we don't really have 200 years in our hand right now. So what was discussed, and that we must implement a forward-looking kind of a common norm for public and private higher education institutions. Every institution should be held accountable in a progressive and fair way. And now, linking contributions of science, research, and innovation system, again, some of it came from yesterday, with the inclusive economic growth agenda does help. And I think we need to, more and more, we have to be practical and actually not just thinking of publishing a paper somewhere, though I think the worth of doing basic or fundamental research or just for the sake of it cannot be ignored. So pre-COVID, there is a panic about future of work. And the questions we have been asking ourselves, will an algorithm take away your job? What are humans then still good for? And that has been a debate at the core of Shiv Nada University as well, that if machines are going to take over our jobs, are we going to produce students who would just mimic these machines? So we had several answers for what humans are still good for. And I'm again simplifying things, that social intelligence is far from being fully automated. Humans also have an edge over machines in creativity. And maybe that's the line that we should all take, because whatever philosophically we believe to be the right thing to do, turns out in business also it makes perfect sense. One thing that was talked about today very nicely about diversity, and almost everybody has read the Harvard Business Review in 2016 November when it talks about diverse teams are smarter. So diversity, we don't do it just because it's the right thing to do. We also do it because it makes business sense, and we found that out later. So anyway, I think to answer the question and the panic about future of work, we talked about maybe combining in our curriculum the left brain with the right brain, the left brain which is logical and therefore can be coded, the right brain which is visual and intuitive is far from being coded. So if you have a curriculum that's project driven, that combines these two parts, maybe you retain your edge. So these are the thoughts around curriculum that was going on pre-COVID. And India also, Partha mentioned yesterday, I was talking about the national education policy that came out end of July this year. So amidst the pandemic, many good things were happening. And this policy, after so many years, the new policy advocates major reforms in higher education. It talks about choices, program durations, flexibility, multiple entry exits, etc. This is what we also have been practicing and advocating. And this policy gives new energy to our vision and our approach. So it's about multidisciplinarity, which was talked about even today, holistic training, not in silos, and no fight between breadth versus depth. Because real life problems, for example, would need real life solutions that are not restricted to one discipline. And students must have a multidisciplinary breadth, which would allow them to handle interdisciplinary areas of importance. So the traditional boundaries of disciplines, education in silos, have become irrelevant. But I must emphasize what we talked about is that interdisciplinarity should not be at the cost of disciplinarity. The student should be trained to go deep into at least one discipline. In today's economy, a specialist is again in demand. I saw a question around that. And businesses are looking at specialists to deliver data-driven results, for example. So when the students go deep in one subject and learn how to think in a research or exploration-based setting, they will be able to relearn a new stream which today's unknown future may demand of them. So that's basically is the idea. You all know that, but that came out very, very nicely from our discussion. So the point I also made yesterday is that the brightest minds of our generation should engage their time and energies in social and technological developments of the physical kind, and not just in improving social media or e-marketing, e-commerce algorithms. So it has become fashionable to talk about in India, liberal arts of the kind that were being discussed on one hand, and disruptive technologies of AI, etc. on the other. And we must remember that pure and fundamental science, basics, have played a pivotal role in shaping the world. So the need for, say, clean energy, advanced materials, water, sustainability, health, everything is extremely important, as disruptive technologies alone will not be able to solve all societal problems. So students and faculty must know the career options in these and what is the future like. So in India, of course, many people mentioned that we are probably the third largest higher education system with 37 plus million students, 1.4 million teachers, or whatever. And so it's really, there's many problems. The higher education sector faces many challenges. We have many layers, and I keep saying that 17th century coexists with 21st century, and we need to address very complex issues. There is a severe shortage of resources at all levels. There are also issues of social and cultural equity in educational provision and participation. We need to make sure that our elite higher education institutions do not stay elitist. So there are other issues that we discussed about curriculum, that skilling that everybody is talking about. I personally believe skilling cannot be taken totally outside the higher education system. The only skill that will survive in this crisis, future of work, for example, is the skill of critical thinking and creative problem solving. And of course, you need communication and decision making as well. So rest of the, if you skill people outside the higher education system, they would be out of skill in no time. So education should accelerate invention. Innovation may happen anywhere, but essentially we need to also then emphasize maybe on enterprise education applications and not necessary entrepreneurship, let's say enterprise education. So technology always comes as a disruptive lagging education sector. Like before, what we wish is that university education should drive and not just respond to industry or technology. And for that, you need competent leadership, which is often not talked about in India. And so competent leadership and resources, both are necessary to enable. We also talked about education quality. Education without quality serves no purpose, but how do you measure quality? So accreditation is one kind. Ranking by uniform set of parameters makes our higher education system risk averse, right? And I think that's where you kill innovation. That's where you kill curiosity and research exploration, all of that. Very nice point made today, about collaboration and exchanges. This is the best thing that has happened thanks to COVID, that we are realizing it more. What we need is very strong, equitable, credible partnerships on mutual strengths and not weaknesses. So at national and international levels, academic and industrial, public, private. And so there needs to be ecosystems of partners centered around universities. And these are competitive necessities in which everyone can win. The other very important point that I'll say and stop, resilience and flexibility in the system. That was talked about today, and these are the keywords actually. In a time of rapid change and high uncertainty, responsible policymaking requires identifying and preparing for new and unexpected development. So expect the unexpected. So it demands, I will not complete this argument, it has been stated already. So it demands a zone of openness. And I think this is again a necessity. It's not something that is the right thing to do, but it's essentially a necessity given today's world. I like to say that education should be hands-on, which partly brings you back to the campus. It has to be minds-on, and it also has to be hearts-on. When you find your passion, you're likely to excel. Hearts-on would mean that flexibility in making mistakes and choosing, and then taking risk stays pretty much on. So it's not a fanciful statement. It's actually what today's world demands of us. So Partha, I'll stop here. And and then back to you. Thanks very much for conducting it so nice.
Thanks, Rupa. Again, I mean, I'm very, very thankful to all of you today and yesterday for wonderful discussion. And in fact, you know, one of the things that we started yesterday was talking about Humboldt, and today again it came out, right? And what I see is, in some sense, reaffirmation of the three things that he talked about, right? That unity of research and teaching, freedom of teaching, and academic self-governance. It's so enduring that you know, it kind of encompasses all our discussion in some sense. So with that, let's end today. I really, really appreciate all of you, Nick, Yves, and Daniels, to take your time off. I know you're the busiest people around right now, but It's been wonderful having you and having this conversation. And next time, we definitely have to be in the same room, right? And we'll plan that at SNU, I think.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Bye bye.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you.